Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Welcome to episode 65. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Welcome to episode 65. We're halfway through season 7, which means it's about time for Temple's Treasures.
Yes.
My favorite episodes, because it inspires me to build more decks. I've built a 60 deck because of this episode. Because of the research I did.
Research.
Yes. Makes it sound professional.
That's right.
As with every Temple's Treasures, we like to search for underused, underappreciated cards within a certain aspect of Magic.
Yeah.
Generally old, or at least first printed old. And so we have a few little rules we like to set before we get into it.
Yeah.
We're each going to choose 4 to 5 cards. It's going to be, in this case, black. And in this case, sorceries.
Yes.
They're going to be under 1 to 2,000 decks, according to EDHREC at the time of recording. And the first printing had to have been before 8th edition.
Yes.
I know a few of my cards have been reprinted since, which just makes it all the more amazing that they're in such few decks.
Right.
Yeah. Like I said, these are fairly underappreciated cards. But that said, they're not going to be great sometimes. They're going to be very niche. They're going to be very specific to sometimes specific decks, but also specific metas. You're not going to be going CEDH anywhere soon with these. So
I will say something I did notice.
Yeah.
Now, as Andy said, we're looking at older cards, and we're looking at black sorceries. I did notice an inordinate number of black sorceries involve getting rid of a card out of somebody's hand.
Yeah.
There are a lot of cards that do this. Sometimes it's random. Sometimes sometimes you can, you get to look at their hand and pick one. Sometimes they pick the card. There's all kinds of variables in there, but there were a lot of sorceries that just involved forcing your opponent to discard a card.
Yeah, it honestly made the research process a bit of a slog, just like reading through all these cards and realizing that they all do the same thing, where it's like, you got to discard now.
Right.
And I don't know. There's a time and place. I've been toying with the idea of making a Spectre deck, and honestly, this opened my eyes to realize that may be easier than I thought. Have all the creatures be specters, have all the non-creatures be these types of cards. But I know personally, discard effects are a bit feel bad.
Right. Well, this is part of the reason why a lot of the cards that I looked at were cards that I simply looked at and then moved on immediately. One, I'm not a real big fan of forcing someone to discard a card. It's just, I want to take away some of your fun, is basically what this is saying. Now, if you're playing with discard because you want to get cards into your graveyard and you are making yourself discard, well, that's a whole other story. That's a hoop and a fun twist. But forcing your opponents to discard is less fun. And for the most part, we are also talking about Commander here. We're talking about multiplayer formats. When you're playing one-on-one and you can force your opponent to discard, well, then they're losing a card. When you're playing against 3 opponents and you're forcing one of them to discard a card, in effect, it's only 1/3 as effective as it would be if you only had one opponent. So how good are these cards to begin with?
Right.
So in any event, what this comes down to is there were a lot of those options. And however, there were plenty of others, and I chose others.
Oh, yeah. So I was super excited for this episode because black is one of my favorite colors to play. And I was excited to jump in and see what is out there that I didn't know about.
Right.
It's funny because my list has a few cards that just through accumulation of bulk.
Yeah.
I have a few of these and have tried to slot them into decks before.
Right.
Whether successful or not is dependent on how you define success. But no, they're a lot of fun. So,
Yeah. All right. I want to start.
please do.
Okay. My first card is called Suppress. It's for 2 and a black, and it's a sorcery. And the current reading of the text is: target player exiles all cards from their hand face down. At the beginning of the end step of that player's next turn, that player returns those cards to their hand. Now, we just spent a lot of time talking about discard, but this is less about discard and way more about, I'm tired of you constantly stopping me from doing all the fun stuff. So I'm going to play this card, and you're going to be, you're going to be, what's the shields down?
Oh, yeah.
Until the end of your turn. Because it's at the beginning of that player's next turn. So that
It's like
any fogs, any counters, any disenchants, any ways to stop attacking creatures, all the things that can cause an issue when you want to apply pressure to your opponent. This sort of solves all of that, because in the end, if they need to counter something, if you're playing suppress, they have to assume that it's because you're going to go off, and you'd want to make sure that they can't stop you. Then they have to stop the suppress.
Yeah.
So if they have that counter, they have to use it on the suppress, not on the what you were planning to do. They have to work in some way to keep their hand, and this is just another hoop for them to jump through.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially where it feels like the black version of Teferi's Protection.
Yeah.
Where it's more offensive, obviously. Where
Right.
it's like, all right, now you got to phase your hand out, essentially.
Yeah.
And the nice thing too, the thing that makes it feel a little less bad is that if I cast this, I don't get to see your hand. You exile it face down. So
Yep.
it's still hidden information.
Yes.
But it is definitely like a nice way to end up trying to like go for it. Like, all right, 3 mana at the beginning of your turn, play this, and then try and win the game.
Right. Now, the other part about this card that I really get a kick out of is we're playing multiplayer.
Mm-hmm.
So where your target sits in the turn order is very relevant. Because if the person sitting to my left is the next person to go after my turn, and I play suppress and target them,
Yeah.
it basically means I get to do my attack, and you can't do anything from your hand. And then on their turn, they draw a card.
And that's their only card.
And that's their only card. Okay, but at the end of their turn, they get all their cards back.
Right.
Plus the card that they have in hand. If the person's sitting to my right, then I take away all their cards. I can do all of the things that I could do that I've just mentioned. But then on the next turn, the next person also gets all that benefit. So that if you're playing a 4-player game, that guy and the next person are also going to get that benefit. So you could argue that all 3 of you could attack without fear of anything coming out of their hand to stop you. And on top of that, then they get to draw their card. On their turn, they'll draw their card, and at the end of their turn, they get all their other cards in hand. But they still haven't done anything with those cards. So you just get more time, and more opponents get the benefit of you playing suppress against that one person. I love the way that this is set up, and I appreciate that it only gets stronger the farther or the closer to the right the person is sitting next to you. And it's just That's not something that the designers ever considered when they were making this card. And honestly, it's not something most people consider. And you rarely see this sort of thing, even in the current crop of Magic cards. I mean, you just don't see a card that just gets stronger and stronger depending on who you play against.
Yeah.
Or depending on where the person is sitting that you're playing against in the turn order.
Right. Like we do have all these like commander-based cards where it is like dependent on how many players you have. But
yes,
we have yet to see a card where, where it's designed intentionally with the like placement of the player, which is very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is sort of something where you could say, the player who plays after the person to your left gets a 5/5 demon with flying.
Right.
Most games, in one-on-one, that's going to be you, but in multiplayer, you're now looking diagonally across the table and hoping it's okay that he gets a 5/5. I just got a kick out of the card, and I think it's a good card, even if you're just playing it directly to the person on your left.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, how many decks this is in?
Suppress?
Yeah.
36. At least that's what I had.
It's 38 now. Up in the past 2 weeks, it's gone up twice.
Man, oh man. 2 more people seeing the light.
Quick, we gotta get this episode out before it's over 2,000.
Oh no!
I'm gonna start with one of my higher end cards.
Okay.
It's called Head Games. It's 3 black. And it says target opponent puts the cards from their hand on top of their library. Then you search that player's library for that many cards. That player puts those cards in their hand and shuffles their library. It's kind of like discard. And I can see this going in 2 different ways. The obvious of, all right, you take that they have a good hand. You take their good cards, you give them basic lands, and done. And scene. Or, where I want to see this played, is you target somebody who is a little behind, or maybe you have like struck a deal of like, hey,
right,
do you trust me?
Yeah.
You're like, do you trust me? And then you play it.
Right.
And they're like, what? I do, but like, what is going on?
Right.
And so you take their hand, you take their library, you find, how many ever cards? Let's say 6. Let's say they have 6 cards in hand. You find some good creatures, you find some good sorceries, you get them ready to get rid of opponent 2 or 3. It's difficult because you want to be able to give them an opportunity. In this case, you want to give them an opportunity to help you out. But once they are done with the dirty work of killing opponent, now you have to get rid of them.
Right.
So, unfortunately, this may be a Kingmaker card, but I think as long as you are backing it up with other cards, it could be a lot of fun. And I think that if you are playing a deck that wants to play this political game, I would consider pushing it that way rather than the basic, no pun intended, play of just giving them basics and shipping it off.
Yeah. This is a fancy fact or fiction.
Yeah.
But it's taken to the extreme.
Oh, yeah.
And I like that.
It's playing favorites by the long shot.
It absolutely is. Quite often, I think you're going to do this in a situation where the board needs removal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can get the board removal. You can get, with head games, in theory, whatever the table actually needs is what you can get.
Yeah.
You just have to go and give it to an opponent. Now, it just becomes a question of how nice do you want to be. I mean, obviously, you don't want to give them too many gifts. But if you can give them one piece that's for an obvious problem on the board,
right?
I don't think anyone is going to complain because it cost you a card, it cost them a card. Everybody's happy, and you got rid of the card that was the problem.
I think it's interesting too because it has you put their hand on top of the library first, so then it becomes part of the library.
Yeah.
So if you are genuinely searching for just one card out of their library, you can say they have the 6 that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. You can give them 5 of the cards that they had in hand back. Yeah. And then the 6th card of removal or whatever.
Right. 2 other things to consider. Mm-hmm. One, you get to see their entire library. So if you are playing against an opponent that you haven't played against a dozen times, you get to see their entire library. So you can quickly come to the conclusion whether or not they lied to you and they are playing that absolutely busto deck, or you can get a sense of, just how powerful this deck is and how problematic this could be, etc., etc. What you also get is it says target opponent puts the cards from their hand on top of the library. Okay? Now you can pick it up and see what they had in their hand. And then you look at them and say, why didn't you play this? Really? Really? Then you give them just that.
Right.
And a bunch of lands. And it's like, here, you get the hint. But you get to see what they were holding.
Yeah.
And then you can determine a lot based on what the player was holding. I mean, if they're holding 5 cards, and you see that they're holding, 3 of them are cards they could have played, but they didn't, then you can start to look at the board and figure out why aren't they playing this? What are they playing around? How does this work? So you can really do the head games of the card. So, and I love that. I think that's,
oh, absolutely.
That's a great setup.
I do love using it for the good of the table rather than to just screw over one player.
Right. Like, I mean, you can play it as a discard your hand. I mean, the most obvious use of the card is discard your hand, draw that many lands. I'm even going to make sure they're all the same type.
Right.
Here you go. Good luck recovering from this. But that just doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah. And if you want best of both worlds,
right,
choose the player with two cards in hand.
Yeah, choose the guy with fewer cards. And then you have to make less big decisions. Right. You can just simply take away the card, or, the benefit is that a lot of times some of the cards that are in people's hands. Anybody who's playing buyback, they've got the card in hand because they played it and brought it back to their hand. If somebody's playing something and they bounce the creature back to their hand, it's in their hand. And if you're playing this card, it's your turn and they couldn't play their land or whatever anyway. So you play the head games and, get rid of that. Get rid of that buyback spell that you had a hell of a time getting rid of in the first place. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really like this card.
This card, when I first looked it up, it had 1133 decks. Yeah. It now has 1146. So things are speeding up here.
Things are getting cranked up.
So let's head on to your second card.
All right, my second card is Gaze of Pain. Yep.
Gaze of Pain crossing off my list
is a sorcery. It says until the end of turn, whenever a creature you control attacks and isn't blocked, you may choose to have it deal damage equal to its power to a target creature. If you do, it assigns no combat damage this turn. So basically, one of your opponents has a creature that you just can't get rid of for whatever reason. Most likely, they don't block, or it's black, and all of your removal that you've got because you're playing black says non-black creature. So you're kind of stuck, and you're trying to figure out a way to get rid of this card. Gaze of Pain to the rescue. Especially when you explain to one opponent that what you want to do is, please don't block, because I don't want my creature to die. and then I will play this card. Or you just play that card and just find out which opponent is willing to let you swing unblocked.
Especially since it's a sorcery anyway.
Right. So it's all up front.
Yeah.
And if your opponent is, understands what's about to happen, they let it happen, and you get rid of a creature. It just... And that's the other part. Don't treat this like fight, because that creature is not getting to do damage back to your creature. This is just damage one way.
It's a punch, as they say, or a rabid bite.
Right. You get to sucker punch a guy, and he doesn't get to take backsies. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And for 1 and a black, it's a fairly inexpensive. Fairly inexpensive cost.
Especially if you go wide, because it's for every creature, and you don't necessarily have to have it assign differently.
Well, right, and it says for each creature you control that attacks and is not blocked. So if you have a bunch of tokens, you can send 5 tokens, right? And you can mix it up so that you could even target 2 creatures with your 5. So, 1 takes 3, 1 takes 2.
Yeah.
You can mix it around a little bit.
Yeah, the targeting is per creature rather than per spell.
Right.
Yeah. I'm surprised to see it's only in 55 decks.
Yeah. Still 55. That one didn't
Still
go
50.
up.
People don't want to look at this card.
I understand you don't want to look at the card. The art is... Yeah. It's tough.
It's disturbing. So careful out there, everyone. My next card is actually the one that I built a 60 card deck around. I'm not saying it's good, but I just want to see how it goes, because I think it's a really cool finisher, and I think it is the thing that makes it where, let me just say...
Give me the card.
Yeah. Let me stop. It's called Haunting Misery. It costs black 1. It's a sorcery. Surprise! It says remove X creature cards in your graveyard from the game, which I assume is an additional cost. Haunting Misery deals X damage to player. Or to target player.
That's been errated to read target player or planeswalker.
Oh, cool. So, say you're coming up at the end of the game, and you've got, a few, zombies out. And you're like, I actually cannot get through my opponent's defense. But it's the end of the game, so my graveyard's full. Throw your graveyard at their face, and hopefully it'll be just enough. Especially where we're getting a lot of things where it's, getting a lot of copy spells lately, where you can copy instants and sorceries and stuff. In those cases, you don't have to pay the payment every time. So, you can do 2x or whatever.
Right.
But if it's, coming up at the end of the game, you don't need those things in your graveyard anymore. Use them as X and just get in for that damage. Yeah. If you still have multiple opponents left, they'll see what you're doing. And it just helps get out of that stalemate. And it's pretty cool tech for things like Sir Conrad, where it counts the number of creatures coming out of the graveyard, out of your graveyard, which is the payment here. So even if this gets countered, Sir Conrad still triggers. And I just like the idea of using cards that sometimes you'll want to use as your hand. Like Graveyard is becoming second hand now.
Yeah.
Being able to pull stuff out of your graveyard is more and more and more and more common. So throwing it away feels weird.
Yeah.
To deal X damage. It feels like a red card, but it's not. It feels very interesting to to see it as like a way to stop that stalemate, to either, get them going, to either be like, hey, now you're at 2 and now you have to really think about your attacks, or just take them out of the game.
Right.
I mean, if you're playing any sort of mill strategy, it could very well be that you have 20 creatures in your graveyard.
Right.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
So I built a 60 card deck out of it. I've got 3 copies in it.
Okay.
And probably not enough creatures. But I'm hoping it does what I'm thinking it will do, and like just kind of chip in for that last few points of damage.
Right.
And for 3 mana for a sorcery, it's whatever.
Sounds good.
Yeah. This is in 37 decks.
Ooh.
Up from 35 when I originally. Why are people looking at black sorceries right now?
Yeah, from pre-8th edition.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I think that marks us at halfway, so
yes, it
let's
does.
throw it over to our sponsor of today's episode, and we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of False Pod is brought to you by Discard. Did you say this card? What card? No, discard. This card? No, discard. Oh! Now back to you. Hey! That's what I got. Discard right here.
Hey.
What's discard?
Just next card?
God damn it.
Let's see. Okay, so my next card, Ashen Powder.
Woohoo!
Ashen Powder, it costs 2 and 2 black mana, 4 mana total. It says, put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now,
Wild.
there are other cards that do something similar to this, but for 4 mana, it's just a good rate.
Yeah.
It's a good rate. And I am a big fan of playing with my opponent's creatures. Jason All talks about his 75% theory. And a big part of that is, or the entire concept is the idea that you are playing a deck that morphs, that essentially moves up and down to match the level of your opponents. And a big way to do that is to play your opponent's creatures, or to use your opponent's stuff against themselves. And Ashen Powder really fits that idea, so that, so you don't find yourself playing an overpowered deck against opponents who weren't expecting it. It just works with what the opponents have. So if your opponents are running decks where where the creatures are massive and huge and everything is amazing, then that's what you're going to get. If you're playing against opponents who see a vanilla 6/6 as being an absolute house, then that's what you're going to get. So I like the idea that it sort of scales up and down to the strength of your opponents.
Yeah.
I just like the card.
Yeah, and even with that example, though, like, if one of your opponents thinks a 6/6 with a vanilla 6/6 is like top tier, like, you've got 2 other opponents.
Right.
So, like, you've got plenty of choice, generally.
Right.
Unless, one of your opponents getting hosed. But
sure. I also like this as a way to get an opponent's card out of their graveyard. Because, as we all know, a card in a graveyard is just a card that's about to come out later. So that's nice. And I also like this with Tombstone Stairwell. Because Tombstone Stairwell counts the number of creature cards in each person's graveyard and gives you that many zombie tokens. 1 less zombie tokens for an opponent. That's a nice little benefit. Yeah. And I appreciate just how niche the idea that it helps Tombstone Stairwell is. But
Yeah.
Hey, I
it's
fit
like
that market.
It's kind of a 2-creature swing on that. Because they have one less blocker and you have one more attacker.
And the one more attacker I've got is generally going to be the best thing that's sitting in the graveyard. So I'm, you're looking for a Sun Titan. You're looking for
a wonder, an anger.
Yes, that's certainly an option as well. There are all sorts of things that you can do with this card. A creature that gives you removal when it enters the battlefield. A creature that it can be a very small game too. Yeah. And yes, there are other cards out there that do this and that do it really well. And quite often they're bigger. They do multiple cards at once. And I like this one.
Yeah.
So
I like
the whole idea. So.
Yeah. I like that it doesn't, like, you can go for the big thing that will help you out, but also the idea of helping you out with this card could mean stopping their engine.
Right.
Like, maybe they have a card in their graveyard that really would get their engine going.
Yeah.
And if you take it away from them, it's slowing it down.
Yeah.
Which is nice. Ashen Powder was also on my list.
When I saw it, it was in 445 decks.
Same. It's at 451 now. People are really building decks nowadays.
Yep.
Who knew?
Who knew
People like building decks?
Go for it. Andy, what's your card?
My next card is it's a creature tribal type. Okay. Perfect card.
Sure.
It's called Afoot Dredging. It's in 992 decks.
Afoot Dredging. It costs 3 and a black. Mm-hmm. It says return up to 3 target creature cards of the creature type of your choice from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it gets you back any changelings. But also, like, say you're playing vampires. I had this in my vampire deck for the longest time because you just name vampires, you get 3 back to your hand immediately. Right. Granted, it's not great for its rate. I mean, like, its rate's fine. For 4 mana, get 3 creatures back. Yeah. Then you got to play the creatures, but it's not optimal. But getting 3 creatures back is great. Right. And it's up to, so you don't have to wait to have 3 creatures in. Yeah. Even though you might want to. I've definitely had this card in hand and been like, I only have two creatures in my graveyard. I want to wait for a third. Right. So that I can use it, get the most value out of it. Bad idea. Just play it when you need it. It does its thing. I mean, you've got cards like Raise Dead for 1 black to get 1 creature back. Right. So obviously, the rate there is 1 for 1. 4 for 3, not amazing, especially when it's so restricted.
Well, I mean, like you said, you're going to be using this in theme decks. Right. And this is also a nice way to dance around that commander tax one time. When your commander dies, just leave it in the graveyard and choose the commander's creature type. And in theory, that's going to match up with a number of other cards in your graveyard, and you'll get a handful back.
Definitely.
So it's certainly another way to set it up. I know that with a lot of these older cards, I tend to look at or try and look at ways that they couldn't possibly have thought of as a benefit. Like, how does this card, is this card, extra good because they didn't know about commanders? Is this extra good because in this day and age, they only ever considered one-on-one Magic. They never considered multiplayer. So is it better because it's multiplayer? So the idea of being able to get your commander back without having to pay the tax, I like the idea. So I think that's certainly one of the benefits of the card.
Afoot Dredging 992 decks, now 1004. So all right, get on it.
Better get there before it becomes too good for our
for Temple's Treasures.
Yeah.
I think we got enough time for what? One more?
Yep.
All right. Well, one each.
All right. I got one.
Okay.
I got a good one.
Okay.
It costs 6 and 2 black.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. No, I don't.
Overwhelming Forces.
I did know.
Okay. Overwhelming Forces. It's 6 and 2 black. So 8 mana. This is huge. Yeah. It reads, destroy all creatures target opponent controls. Draw a card for each creature destroyed this way.
Woo!
That's just big. It's just big. I mean, you're going to choose the one who has the most creatures, and you're going to draw 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
So you're going to draw 7, let's say. Fine. You know what? Let's just say draw 6. Would you pay 8 mana to draw 6 cards and wipe out one opponent's board? I mean, hells yeah. I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's great.
Right. Now, compare this to In Garrick's Wake.
In Garrick's Wake is, I believe, 6 and a black?
In Garrick's Wake is 7 black. So it costs 9.
It costs 1 more.
1 more. And it destroys all the creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers. So it doesn't focus on one player. It focuses on the entire board.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Right. No card draw.
No card draw. We are obviously in the late game here.
Right.
You are obviously in a rough spot if you're playing In Garrick's Wake, because you're wiping your opponents in the hopes that you will then be able to swing in and take at least one person out. At least. Overwhelming Forces, it's going to put you in a position to take one person out, and it's also going to give you a mitt full of cards to protect yourself from your remaining opponents. I mean, so In Garrick's Wake, Plague Wind is another one. Plague Wind, same cost as In Garrick's Wake, 7 black. Plague Wind, destroy all creatures you don't control. They can't be regenerated. So in other words, In Garrick's Wake, you can regenerate your creatures, but you lose your planeswalker as well. Plague Wind, you can't regenerate the creatures. As
played a lot of regenerate lately.
Yeah, exactly. It's old school when regenerate, in theory meant something, but even then it was barely relevant. I'm going to take the card draw. I want the card draw. I appreciate the value of wiping out all of your opponents. If you can wipe out one opponent and get a mitt full of cards, I don't know that you're going to get the pushback that you would if you wiped out all of your opponents. If you're wiping out all your opponents, you better win in the next 2 turns. Because at that stage in the game, they've all got 8, 9 mana out. They're going to come back with a fury within a turn or two of you having played Plague Wind or In Garrick's Wake. So you better be ready. And neither one of those do anything to put cards in your hand. Whereas Overwhelming Forces, you are reloaded and ready to go. I love the card. I think it's really cool. I think that it's there. Now, I mean, your meta may vary. Obviously, it's an expensive card, so you might not want to be playing an 8 mana sorcery. But I'll leave that up to you, and you can determine that with your meta. So,
yeah, this card is in about 332 decks. It's also fairly expensive.
Yeah, because it's Portal 3 Kingdoms.
Right.
And it really didn't get a lot of reprints outside
I think
of
it
that,
had a single paper reprint, and it was a Judge promo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, the Judge promo is only worth $35, so, it's cheap.
It's 10%, it's 90% off.
Right.
So
it also helps explain why it's in only 332 decks.
Yeah.
But whatever. I don't care.
I'm having a tough time deciding between the rest of my cards.
Well, you got one more choice.
I know.
We got time for one. Which one is it going to be?
Yeah, all right. It's called Soul Exchange. It's for black. It's from Fallen Empires, so it's good. As an additional cost to cast the spell, exile a creature you control. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. put a +2/+2 counter on that creature if the exiled creature was a thrall. Probably wasn't a thrall unless you're playing.
There were a lot of thralls in Fallen Empires.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, Tevish Zat will do that.
Tevish Zat, the new Commander Legend, well, new, quote unquote, 2 years old. Commander Legends, Planeswalker makes thralls. But regardless, for 2 mana and exile a token that you control, I mean, probably.
Right.
You get a creature from your graveyard directly into play.
Yeah.
Now, I don't see much downside to this other than the fact that it's a sorcery and you exile a creature you control. I mean, of course, it's not going to be an instant. Mm-hmm. I don't think you want it to be an instant necessarily.
Yeah, well, it would be nice for it to be an instant because then, if it's an instant, you can use it on. You can block with your creature, and instead of it dying, you just sack it. I get that. With it being a sorcery, you have to pay for it on your turn. There's all the usual restrictions that come with it being a sorcery, but the idea that you can swap, as you say, a token creature for the best creature in your graveyard.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's going to cost you 2 mana. Done. I'm done. I'm in. Let's do that. It comes right under the battlefield. Yeah, okay, fine. It didn't get a +2/+2. It doesn't get +2/+2 counter. That's a counter, by the way. A +2/+2 counter. Not 2 +1/+1s. None of that stuff. We're doing Fallen Empires. It's a +2/+2 counter if it's a thrall. If the stat creature was a thrall. So, no, great card.
Yeah.
Why not?
Right?
Yeah.
I mean...
and especially, you just talked about with... what's his name?
Tevish Zat?
No.
Oh. Sir Conrad.
Yes. With Sir Conrad, you've got a creature going to the graveyard, a creature coming out of the graveyard.
You have a creature coming out of the graveyard, because this creature's getting exile, baby.
Oh, is it? Oh, no.
But, still, I mean, it's still another one of those triggers of something coming out of the graveyard. And I think it works particularly well, obviously, in token strategies.
Yeah.
Or if you have somebody else's creature.
Yeah.
If you take, if you're playing Rakdos, take one of their things with a threaten effect, and then you exile it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's not just sacrifice, it's exile.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, if you're playing black, you probably have ways to just throw stuff into the graveyard, and then you get something for 2 mana.
Sure.
Obviously not as great as Victimize, which is 1 in a black. You sacrifice a thing, and you get 2 things back untapped, or you get 2 things back tapped. But who cares? This is so cool. And if you play it, people will be like, wait, what? What is that? And it comes back untapped, which is also a benefit.
Right.
I like it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, you can definitely play this after combat.
Yeah.
As long as you're comfortable in the knowledge that the creature's not going to die during combat. Because, man, that would bite. But, yeah. No, I like the card. I like the option. And I really like the idea of sacking an opponent's creature that you've stolen for the turn.
Yeah. This card is in 974 decks. Up from 941 when I first checked. So we really, I gotta start.
Gotta get in there quick.
Yeah. Was there any card that was on your list that you were just like, I wish I could talk about it, but just didn't seem, it seemed too niche?
One of the ones I kind of liked was Stream of Acid. It was 2 black and a black. It says destroy a land or a non-black creature.
Okay.
Neither of those are particularly exciting.
It's a flexible Doomblade.
But, yes, it's a flexible card. There are plenty of times when I wish I had just, 1 piece of land destruction. Just because an opponent has...
Gaia's Cradle, or...
Yes, a Gaia's Cradle, or...
That one that flickers your stuff.
Yeah. Maze of Ith, or... Kessig Wolf Run. Yeah, take your pick. whatever land. There's always going to be that one land that just annoys you, and you wish you could just have it gone.
Yeah, that blue-green one that gives things flash.
Yes.
Alchemist's Refuge.
Yes. This is going to get rid of that. And honestly, and if there's nothing, and if there are no lands that are an issue, then you can destroy a non-black creature. If there's always the backup. Now, for 4 mana, that's not a creature removal, not a good deal. Even for land removal, 4 mana is not that great. But the fact that you can get either or out of this card, I like that idea. So,
yeah.
But I didn't think it was quite as good as the other ones I picked, but I did like the flexibility of that card.
Yeah, and my runner up was speaking of Sir Conrad.
Yeah.
I guess a 2 card, because the commander, a 2 card essentially win the game combo, depending on people's life totals. Morality Shift for 5 black, sorcery. Exchange your graveyard and your library, and then shuffle your library. So basically, it takes all the creatures in your graveyard.
Sure.
Puts them in. It takes them out of your graveyard.
Yeah.
So you get all those triggers, and then it takes all the creatures in your library and puts them in the graveyard. So you get all those triggers. So it essentially says, Sir Conrad it does 1 point of damage to each opponent. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. So each of your opponents is going to be taking 1 damage per creature in your deck, minus the ones on the graveyard, or minus the ones on the battlefield.
Right.
Which could be somewhere between 30 and 40.
Could very well be death.
Right.
Yeah.
And this card works.
What card was this again?
It's called Morality Shift.
Okay.
It's from Judgment. It seems kind of ridiculous. But it also works well to get your graveyard back into your library. Like if you have, a handful of cards left in your library and you're playing something else, I don't know. Right. It just kind of refills your library, which is nice. That was my little runner-up, I guess.
Right.
Wow. I keep wanting to go, but
that's another Temple's Treasures in the bag.
Yeah, we did it. We got Black Sorceries done. I think that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we've got a cool Commander Legends themed episode coming at you, because we're coming up on Battle for Baldur's Gate in a couple weeks. I guess it's next week. I hope I did my math right. If not, this is all going to be cut out, which will be good because we're running on time. So thank you so much for listening. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you again so much for listening. And may your 5th land be the Temple.
Bye!
Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter at falsepodmtg. Bruce is at ManaBurned, and I'm at Andy Weekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your 5th land be the Temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!